Hi, I'm Dempsey Palat, and this week I'm reviewing... Now before we start off, as always, I just want to take a quick second to remind you guys to make sure you hit that like button if you like today's video, and if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well for more new movie-related content weekly. But without further ado, let's jump into today's film. Ouija Shark, or Ouija Shark, which is how I pronounce it, was directed by Scott Patrick and stars a cast of relative unknowns. The plot focuses on a group of friends who unwittingly unleash a ghost shark after fooling around with a cursed Ouija board. Now, this is a truly independent film. Between the extremely creative premise, the story's confinement to a handful of locations, and the very cheap special effects, you could tell that the filmmaker was just making do with what he had. And I respect that, because I know for a fact that making a film is a massive undertaking, regardless of size or scope. Because I respect the filmmaker so much, I'm going to be reviewing this film as honestly as I would any other film, especially a major Hollywood blockbuster. That being said, even if you disregard some of the film's budgetary restrictions, there's still some pretty major problems here. But there are also some things worth praising too. For one, I love the blatant homages to classic horror films. As a matter of fact, one of the very first scenes that we see in this film is our main character taking a dip in the ocean, or whatever body of water that is, and it's very reminiscent of the opening scene in Jaws. Later on, when the shark has manifested itself and it's attacking people in the woods, you heard that sentence correctly, we get a lot more POV shots, and we even get to see some kills from the shark's perspective, and I found all of those sequences to be very reminiscent of the very first Friday the 13th film. Despite its extremely low budget, it does have some pretty impressive uses of practical effects, I will give it that. For instance, there's this great short scene where you see a pretty realistic arm floating in the water, and I remember seeing that and thinking to myself, why didn't they do more of that? Instead, you get to see the shark for pretty much the whole movie, and if you see the trailer, you'll see the shark too. But I honestly would have liked it if they kept the shark a secret to the very end. It would have built a lot more suspense, and if they just used a lot more practical effects, they could have enhanced that suspense. I almost wish that the ratio of special effects to practical effects was swapped, because then I really do feel like this would have been a totally different movie, or totally different experience altogether. Now, starting to get into some of the film's cons, one of the things that I just wasn't a really big fan of was the acting. With the exception of one or two people, I have to say, just because there are a couple of actors in this, believe it or not, that do a pretty decent job at trying to sell the material, which is a pretty incredible feat if you really think about it. And I mentioned before, this isn't a Hollywood blockbuster. I'm not expecting Hollywood caliber performances. I'm not expecting the next Brad Pitt to come from this. But there are a lot of actors that are just not on the same page here. One of them, the person who plays our protagonist's father, his delivery for every line is just so wooden. And it's unfortunate, because I would argue that he's probably the most important character in the entire film, because he's the audience's source of exposition. He lets us know what's going on for the entirety of the film. And I mean, that's an entirely different issue in and of itself, but I think the shark's performance was a little bit more believable than his. One of the other things that I didn't really like about this film was the way in which it starts off slow and then just picks up out of nowhere. Like, the progression just doesn't feel natural at all. From one minute to the next, we have a killer shark killing people everywhere. And while I do like the idea of an omnipresent killer, even with the exposition that we do get, how it does it and why it does it is just never explained. But the final 10 minutes are especially bonkers, okay? Our lead character essentially goes from wearing a bathing suit the entire film to putting on a leather jacket, some really ripped jeans, and sporting a shotgun. So essentially she becomes the Punisher. And she thinks that she can actually kill the Ouija shark with a shotgun. She's not the only one who thinks that she could shoot a ghost with a gun, though, in this film, which is equally troubling and hilarious. If I'm being honest, what kind of saves this film is that it never takes itself too seriously. Or at least it feels like it's not taking itself too seriously. There are some characters in this film who say that they want to catch some sun and then take off their clothes, but then they sit in some very visible shade. Other characters literally pretend to be on the phone with each other. I know it's called acting, but I mean, when you catch them from their profile and you can see the notifications pop up while they're supposedly in the middle of a phone call, I mean, it really takes you out of it. And there's also a lot of very tongue-in-cheek dialogue here, some very dirty jokes that feel very out of place, and the climax, or one of the climaxes anyway, literally takes place in heaven. What is this film? Probably the most admirable thing about this film is that it leans into its ridiculousness without a care in the world. But even though its premise is a combination of two not-so-original gimmicks, and it becomes increasingly bizarre, and trust me, you have no idea how much more bizarre it gets after heaven, in some ways I feel like it doesn't tap into its full potential. I know, strange thing to say about a film called Ouija Shark, but I feel like it actually could have done a lot more. No pun intended, but I feel like in some ways this film was just scratching the surface. Now, does that mean that I want to see a sequel? I didn't say all that, okay? Maybe ask me in a year or so. What I do know is that this film makes for some very interesting entertainment. But like its titular monster, it's ultimately hollow. And for that, I'm going to give this film 1.5 stars.
Now you've seen how bad things can get, and how quick they can get that way. Well, they can get a whole lot worse.
Guys, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to view this video. It really does mean the world to me. And once again, if you like this video, please make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well for more new movie-related content weekly. Now, if you happen to see this movie, if you loved it, if you hated it, if you haven't even heard of it, let me know what you thought about it down below in the comment section. I look forward to reading and responding to all of your comments. It's one of my favorite things to do. One of my favorite things about being a content creator in the first place. But yeah, that's pretty much all the time that I have for you guys today. As always, be on the lookout for more content soon. And yeah, I do have some other stuff that I'm working on, so I should just probably get back to it. Until next time, I'm Dempsey Pilote. Take care.